Welcome to Training Tuesday. I am Bill Brown, the Director of Innovative Evangelism for the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and we'd like to welcome our siblings from the Baltimore-Washington Conference and the Peninsula Delaware Conference as we gather tonight to continue our conversation that we started 2 weeks ago around intentional discipleship processes and pathways. And tonight we are once again joined by Jack Shitama, who is the director of the Center for Vital Leadership for both the Peninsula Delaware Conferences and the Baltimore-Washington Conferences, as we live in a affiliated relationship with one another. On a side note, Jack and I went to seminary together and spent 4 years in a small group as student local pastors, and so it's been great to reconnect with him through this affiliation. We're also joined by Linda Flanagan, who is the Director for Lay Servant Ministries for the Baltimore-Washington Conference and a member of the Leadership Development Board. And we are joined by Nikki Ellis, who is a member at Eastern United Methodist Church and a member of our Leadership Development Board, and Nona Colbert, who is the pastor of Lanham United Methodist Church and the chairperson for our Leadership Development Board. And they will introduce the rest of our panelists in a moment. A couple of housekeeping notes. The chat is disabled, except we could broadcast some information to it. So if you want to keep it open, you may, and that'll just be to receive some information. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature. We're going to hold all of the questions to the end, but as soon as you think of a question, drop it into the Q&A, and that way you won't forget it, and we can get to it later in the evening. But for now, I want to open us with a word of prayer, then we're going to dive in and get started. So if you would bow your heads as we unite our hearts in prayer tonight. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for gathering us together from around these 2 annual conferences, or from wherever somebody is dialing in tonight. We thank you that even though we are scattered, we are still united as one in Christ Jesus. And that is why we're here tonight, oh God, to draw closer to Jesus and to learn how we as individuals can grow in our faith and how we can help those who are in our care grow in their faith. So I pray that you would pour out your Spirit upon our panelists and upon our participants, that we would gain insight, wisdom, and understanding in the name of Jesus. Amen. All righty. Pastor Nona, I'm going to say, take it away.
Good evening. Thank you, Bill. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back. As Bill has said, my name is Nona Colbert. I'm chair of the Leadership Development Board. I'm also pastor of Lanham United Methodist Church in Lanham, Maryland. I welcome back members of the board who gave presentations last week. Minister Linda Flanagan, Director of Lay Servant Ministries for the Baltimore-Washington Conference, and a certified lay minister. Linda is a member of Good Shepherd United Methodist Church in Waldorf, Maryland. I also welcome back certified lay servant Nikki Ellis, who is a member of Eastern United Methodist Church. Last week, we began the conversation on Intentional Discipleship Pathways, or IDP, which is based on John Wesley's general rule of discipleship: to witness to Jesus Christ in the world and to follow his teachings through acts of compassion, justice, worship, and devotion under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Each member of the board presented a simple rubric to help you understand how the IDP works. We won't review that tonight. Last week's video is available on the conference website under Training Tuesdays. Our goal tonight is to ask tonight's panelists, who represent a cross-section of the churches in the Baltimore-Washington Conference and the Penn Del Conference, and who are actively engaged in an intentional discipleship process, as well as Pastor TJ Mount, who has developed an IDP that has been successful in his appointments, to share their pathways with you. To be clear, no one process works for every church, as you will see with the pathways presented this evening, but what you will get is a sense of the types of pathways available for the culture of your congregation. With that, I turn it over to Sister Nikki Ellis, who will introduce you to our first panelist from St. Matthew's New Life in Baltimore. Nikki?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. It is with great excitement that we're able to bring to you, we'll call them subject matter experts because they are here for a reason and for a purpose. And so as we think about all of the many questions we received last week, it was a resounding request to be able to hear from churches who have implemented some form of the IDPs that we discussed. And so starting us off this evening, we're going to hear from our very own St. Matthew's New Life United Methodist Church, the leader of this church, from Reverend Andre Briscoe Jr., along with one of his lay members, Eleanor Stewart, to begin us off in this dialogue. So I will pass it over to you two.
Good evening, everyone. Pastor Andre Briscoe was appointed to St. Matthew's New Life in 2015. In 2016, we had a leaders retreat, and we began the work of developing an intentional discipleship plan for our church to move from membership to discipleships. The materials that we reviewed at that retreat was See All the People by Julius Dodson and 10 Prescriptions for a Healthy Church. Our mission statement was reshaped to focus outward to our community. The mission of St. Matthew's New Life United Methodist Church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of our community and our congregation. And our vision statement was created at that leaders retreat. Our vision was created to envision God's preferred future, constantly reminding ourselves why we do what we do, to build hope and to empower a world of faith, seeding new life while standing on God's promises. Our vision statement is to meet needs, plant seeds, and to build hope. Building bridges, Pastor.
So as we look at the next slide, you'll see, and you're not able to read it, but our mission statement is there. When I arrived to the church, I was in my last semester at Wesley Theological Seminary, and was trained in helping to reshape and look at churches' mission statements and helping churches become more missional and more intentional about discipleship. And so we had begun that work. Our vision statement, the third phase of our vision statement, is building hope, and as hope representing hospitality, offering Christ, purpose, and engagement. And as we developed our discipleship plan, building off of some of the material that was produced by See All the People, Discipleship Ministries, we focused more on four, we'll call them movements: encounter, engage, educate, and empower. Next slide. Next slide. So the encounter, engage, empower, and educate. We see our congregation as a congregation is welcoming to all persons, regardless of their background, their ethnicity, and their age. And we seek to engage people and have people engage Jesus Christ in discipleship. Next slide. This is very complex, but this is our chart, our discipleship plan. We looked at 5 areas in our congregation, worship being a key for us, and ways in which we can use worship as a pathway to discipleship. The encounter part of the plan, for those who are searching for a relationship with God and community. And those persons that may have been invited by a friend, a loved one, or may have just happened to walk down our block and stop by to see what was going on in the church. We're encountering those persons. Then the engagement, beginning the process of either regularly attending worship, becoming aware of God's presence and God's grace in each and every day, and then growing, educating, and maturing and being empowered to help others through the discipleship process. The other area was community. We, again, as Eleanor said, our mission statement was focused on the congregation. And we, through much discernment and through much prayer, we saw that God was calling us to not be inward focused, but to be outward focused, to focus on our greater community, the larger community. And we've been doing that for the past 7 years intentionally. So we've had many events, many opportunities, and one that has been a constant for us that has greatly impacted the community is our annual block party, where we block off the entire 400 block of 23rd Street and offer many resources. We have a health fair, children's fair as well, a general block party where there's food and other amenities. And we also have various local nonprofits join us in the work and providing resources and supplies to our community. This year, we had the opportunity and the pleasure of having 2 local churches that are not United Methodists join us in our block party to help our community. And also with that, we are beginning to do more work around community development. We're exploring that option as to how we can disciple our community and provide the light of Christ to those outside of our 4 walls. The other areas, our spiritual formation and disciplines, we were intentional about how we were looking at our ministries and seeing them and restructuring them as ways of developing disciples, of giving people opportunity to develop their spirituality, their relationship with God, and their understanding of community. The next area is service and generosity. Service being mission, generosity, stewardship, not just financial, but people just giving of their time to serve not the church, but the greater community. And then Christ-like, those who are called, feel a call to either lay servant ministry or ordained ministry, developing people in that manner to strengthen not just the body, but the greater church. Next slide, please. We restructured how we are organized as a church, but falling in line with the discipline. So we see our congregational development ministries, that would be the church council, the board of trustees, the finance committee, our stewardship committee, and our SPRC as our congregational development ministries that are focused on helping the church live into its mission and vision statements. The other ministries, for example, Bible study, Christian formation, we have a cancer care ministry, our prayer group, and all of our age level ministries. We see those as discipleship development ministries. They're intentionally designed to help people become stronger and better disciples. Our community discipleship development ministries include our soon-to-be 501c3 and some other efforts. We have a mentoring program for young girls. We also have a program that is known as Hot Dog for Handshake, where we prepare a meal for community members and just engage them more, offering sometimes clothing and other resources. Our block party is also part of our community discipleship development ministries. Then our missional discipleship development ministries. For example, our United Women in Faith fall in that category. As a part of us being more intentional about discipleship, we were looking for ways in which we can engage the entire congregation quarterly in a mission, we'll, for lack of a better word, say a mission project. And so every quarter there's some church-wide mission endeavor that most, if not all of the members and family members of St. Matthew's Life engage in. For example, again, our block party is our summer mission project. Our winter project comes at the end of the year, where we adopt families in our community. For example, 3 years ago, we ensured that every household in the 400 block of 23rd Street received a Christmas meal if they were welcoming to that. Every household with children received toys for each and every child, and any other resources that they need. Last year, we adopted a specific family in partnership with one of the local elementary schools, a family with about 4 children. And the entire congregation had come together to give to ensure that that family had a Christmas. Our servant leader discipleship ministries are those ministry areas such as certified lay servants, certified lay ministers, our worship ministries, for example, our music ministry, our dance ministry, our liturgy committee, our audio video ministry, and even our flag ministry. Next slide, please. This reflects our restructuring, and it gives you a listing of all the ministries and groups we have in the church and how we categorize them, being intentional about discipleship. Next slide. When at the beginning of the pandemic, we were looking for ways in which we can re-engage our congregation, the larger community, elected officials, and reaching beyond the four walls of the church to engage new people. And so we developed the Building Bridges initiative. And there are many facets of this initiative that have come about, but pertinent to tonight's conversation, discipleship. We were looking for ways in which we could help our church family and those beyond the church family develop and stay connected, not just as a community, but stay connected in terms of their growth as disciples, their spirituality, their sense of community. And we developed many different opportunities for people to engage persons in the church and outside of the church. Next slide. Here you have two of the areas that you will share tonight in our Building Bridges initiative, bridging discipleship, where we were hoping to strengthen the connection within our membership. We were able to develop a church app as a form as a discipleship tool, and seeing also how we could better utilize social media to reach members and new persons that we've never encountered before. Also, we used our technology to do new forms of spiritual formation, and not just Sunday morning worship services. We also we were looking to establish a stronger online presence for our congregation, and we wanted to grow our discipleship plan. In addition to that, under the Building Bridges initiative, there's the Bridging Our Community. Because we were in the lockdown, if you will, we wanted to still reach out. There was still a need within the larger community. And you can see here examples of ways we sought to reach out, to re-engage, and to be connected to the greater community. Next slide. Part of that Building Bridges, what we have several lay servants, and two of them, Brother Isaac Smith and Eleanor Stewart, led us in a devotional. The first one was Tips for the Journey. It was about a 26-week-long series, and each week there was a short video clip on the various aspects of either spiritual formation, spiritual growth, or reflection on scripture or what was going on in the world at the time. Likewise, following that, Eleanor presented what is known as Matters of the Heart. Next slide. Ways in which we could again engage more people. We noticed with Tips from the Journey, we had persons all over the country and all over the world viewing our material, sharing it. And so we tried to find more ways in which we could intentionally engage persons. So we dealt with Matters of the Heart. This came about in the November, December season, as people dealing with Thanksgiving, people are dealing with issues of loneliness, depression, and so forth. And as we grew closer to the holidays, we also, as a result, growing out of our Matters of the Heart series, had our first Blue Christmas service, and it was done virtually online and had been shared again beyond our four walls of the church and our community of St. Matthew's New Life to the larger community. So also, I meant to say earlier and share that when the pandemic occurred, we had long-term plans of developing our technology and our worship space. The pandemic just made it more clear to us that we needed to procure equipment such as cameras, other broadcasting equipment to reach our extended community members and our church family. So we've, by the grace of God, had persons and other organizations donate and give so that we could pretty much have a studio within our church. And we've helped other ministries and other groups offer discipleship lessons and so forth. We've had outside clergy person come to our church, and she, for 52 weeks of the year, offered a different approach to the liturgical calendar, but each week was a different lesson for the church, such as Advent, funerals in the Christian church, specific holidays, and things pertinent to our Christian faith. In addition to that, we were able to share our resources with other churches in our cluster. We helped many churches in our cluster grow their technology. And our cluster in the Baltimore Metropolitan District, the Resurrection East cluster, we are very close, and we would normally have Advent, Lenten services together, Good Friday, and a few other services throughout the year. And the pandemic made it so we could not gather. So by God's grace, we used the technology, and we created several videos among our cluster churches so that we could still be in communication, still be in fellowship, still offer opportunities for our laity and our clergy to minister to the broader community and the broader church through our cluster Advent service, cluster Pentecost service, cluster Good Friday service, cluster Lenten service, and there was one more, and I apologize, I cannot remember. So we've helped many churches in various ways, not just increase their visibility, but also reach persons and continue to make disciples using new methods of technology. Sister Eleanor, I'll let you share the rest.
Yes, I just wanted to mention this year we did have a community family vacation Bible study, and that was really, really nice. We had a grad to come in to do storytelling with the children, and we also had a musician to come in to teach the children songs, and they thoroughly enjoyed that. And the community prayer walk. That was also very successful. Some went out on the walk around the community, some stayed back at the church and prayed. We also had a caregiver service in November that really touched a lot of people because November is Caregivers Month. So we are steady trying to continue to engage to intentional discipleship with our community and ourselves.
And when we offered the community prayer walk, it was the beginning of the summer, and we had partnered with another church. Two elected officials came out, and many members of the community came out we prayed in a local park, and then walked from the park throughout about, I think it was 5 blocks. And we were in various groups. And along the way, one of the powerful aspects of that community walk was, as we were engaging community members and praying with them and having conversation with them, they joined us in the prayer walk to pray for our community and pray with others in the community. And that was, for us, a clear example of our intentional discipleship plan at work. As we're engaging people in the community, they're joining us in developing their discipleship and bringing others along the way to grow closer to Christ. In addition to that, we've had offered a summer camp. We partnered with a local nonprofit and a few business leaders, and we offered an entrepreneurship camp this past summer for youth in our community, where they learned about business, they learned about stock market. These young people, it amazed me how they grew, and not just their knowledge of business, but their knowledge of just how to balance checkbooks, how to start a business. And many of them did, at the groups, they started their own companies, and they're still working to this day, producing and working, and the work has continued on beyond the camp. And so we're looking for this new year to find more ways to engage young people in our community and to disciple them. And it may not be a outright blatant vacation Bible school, but there are ways in which we can disciple our community members, young people, without forcing, if you will, our viewpoints on them, but welcoming all persons and still offering them Christ and still teaching them the ways of Christ and our Wesleyan ways, and giving them opportunities on their own to come and to engage. And another as Sister Eleanor mentioned earlier, another outgrowth from our discipleship plan has been our increased certified lay ministers, certified lay servant members. We have 3 candidates right now for certified lay minister. 2 are still in the process, finishing up their last modules. One, Eleanor Stewart, she is coming to the end of her process and has 1 or 2 more steps before she is certified this year. We've increased from the time I arrived our certified lay servants, and we still have more persons who are still discerning and seeking ways in which they can answer their call and serve. And I think that's all we have for tonight.
Yes.
Very good. Thank you so much for sharing. You know, one of the questions we received last week was around completion of the rubric. And a lot of questions came around, do we have to fill every box? And I would say, as God leads you, to think about how you can be an intentional and have an impact in the community in which you serve. What a great example St. Matthew's New Life was able to show how to be purposeful and intentional with the activities that you put in place as you seek to become that intentional discipleship church. So we are continuing this journey as we learn together, and we will next have the opportunity to hear from Reverend Lee Farrell from our Severna Park United Methodist Church, who has a plethora of great steps that they have taken to be the answer and the call to their community. And I look forward, as I know you do too, to hear from her and to learn and glean from what they have been able to do in their community. So Reverend Farrell, I'm passing it over to you.
Thank you very much. You can go to the next slide, Bill. Severna Park is a large suburban church in Anne Arundel County. We're currently worshiping about 60% of what we were, pretty much with everybody else, I guess. The thing that got us on a good path and a strong focus was when we held an all-church study, which was fun just all by itself, of a book called The 5 Practices of Fruitful Congregations. Should be congregations. That's probably my typo. The bit is by Bishop Robert Schnase. It's just recently been revised and updated, so you can get hold of this. We just loved this book. It turned us around. The 5 areas, and I will use the whole descriptive method, is passionate worship, risk-taking mission, let me get these right, radical hospitality, extravagant generosity, which is the area of stewardship, and then the one that I'm going to focus on tonight, which is intentional faith development. Many areas of ministry in the church were touched by this study, but I will be focusing on how the intentional faith development piece has made such a huge difference in growing disciples. I am a Christian educator, have been for 46 years. And so this is kind of my passion. And I would like to, share that with you all. We place strong value on Christian education for all ages, thinking that you can't really teach what you don't know, and you can't pass on what you don't understand, and you can't model what you don't truly believe. So this for us is a very strong, our very strong focus. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. This, the way it's set up really is the The children and youth ministries are already well taken care of. We have paid people full-time positions for those. The children's minister is seminary trained, which is really helpful. I do youth ministries, have for all my life, and I am an ordained deacon. So we focus tonight really on more of young adult and adult ministries. Our main goal is really to involve everyone, anyone who comes in the door, to get hooked up in some sort of study or small group, because this is what has touched our people the most. We publicize constantly everything, and that gives people this attitude of, I know there's always going to be something more coming. What's next? What's the next study? And we give a choice, and they like to pick. It's kind of like being in college, but they don't have to take tests. So next slide. This is pretty much a general outline of what we do. Always seasonal studies, Advent and Lent. Great opportunities to teach and witness there. Our regular offerings include probably what a lot of you do, Bible studies and book studies. That includes resources that the conference will give us from time to time, and we try to use them. And then any other season, when there's 6 to 8 weeks here and there, we try to offer courses during, after Christmas, after Easter, and then obviously in the fall. We generally like to take the summer off. We don't always, but we do. We offer a variety of short-term and long-term. I think long-term, a lot of you have probably done Disciple Bible Study. We still offer that, and for youth as well as adults. But for many people, the short-term works better, and they just like to pick and choose. We are doing in person now, still online classes, some that are hybrid, and then we have several home groups that meet on their own. Most of the classes and courses are led by our people are very pastor-centric, sadly. Luckily, the four of us all love to teach, so that works, but we are identifying lay people who are capable of teaching, and our people are finally realizing they could take a course from a lay person. It doesn't always have to be the pastor. So that's a break for us. And we have special focus groups. Faith and race group is obvious. Our sacred worth group deals with inclusiveness and the LGBTQ questions, and that's just really helped our church a lot. We do have an excellent thing for retired people. Small groups through the United Methodist Men, United Women in Faith, and young adults, which is always a bit of a challenge, but we're on a good path right now with some small groups with them. So next slide. So how this has progressed, when people take a study of whatever kind and have a small group where they feel safe enough to share their questions and their doubts and dig into some material really passionately, we've discovered that this has brought us new leaders in different areas of the church. Some people have realized that teaching is their passion, and maybe they would like to move into that area, but it has expanded our area of service. More people, when they feel more convicted about their relationship with Christ and realize that maybe they are gifted and they can do this and lead others to the beautiful place they've been led, then they sign up to teach. One of the things I love is that this has encouraged more people to get active in missions. Locally and nationally, we just brought a team home from Tennessee. I think as you realize, the call of Jesus upon your life, you hear the stories, you see the message there in the gospel, then you realize you need to get off your chair and get involved too. And that's been really exciting to see the number of people get more involved there. sometimes we have witnessing times in worship, and used to be we couldn't get anybody to do that, and now people are much more confident. They also speak up more in classes and in their small groups. And then generally what this has done is expand our entire missional program. So it makes sense, that when your faith deepens, you have to do something, and you have to take action. You can't just sit and learn forever. You need to put your faith into action, and that has really developed for us. And the next slide is just some advice, and be intentional. I think Andre said a word like 10 times also. This is the key here. It doesn't just, these programs don't just run themselves. You have to really put in some intentionality into what do our people need, what will help them grow, how can we lead them closer and closer to Christ. So to be very, very intentional. We have a committee because we're United Methodist probably, and then because that's what gets the work done. So we have a committee of all ages, and we are very intentional about what we offer to our people. That includes, as I mentioned earlier, constant publicity, and you can, as creative as you can be. A lot of these new studies have a video component that you can use in worship that kind of, it's like a 2-minute promo. And using those really can grab people's attention and kind of pull them into, this looks like something maybe I could dive into. We extend personal invitation to just about everyone. We try to invite adults who are related to our church because of outside groups. For example, the nursery school parents. That's probably 80% of our nursery school is the community. They're not church members. So we invite them to everything. Same with Bible school families. That's about 50% is from the community. And so we make sure that they know who we are and what we offer, and we invite them. And same with the youth fellowship, the MYF. A lot of those kids, this is all the church they get, but their parents get nothing. So we try to engage them in classes and discussions as well. You do need to plan long range. It doesn't just happen. The committee kind of works at least 6 months out unless we get a new idea, and we're flexible at the same time. We're always on the lookout for new teachers and leaders. We from time to time do spiritual gifts assessments, and that gets us a lot of new people to get involved in their area. But we especially are looking for those whose gift and passion is teaching and sharing and leading. And then above all, I can't stress enough that we totally let the Holy Spirit be our guide. It's a very big part of who we are, of the faith of each one of us. And then together, we pretty much put the whole program right there in the hands of the Holy Spirit and count on that Holy Spirit to guide us and help us. I'm sure you all know the value of that, but I just need to say that is above all for us. It's the beginning and the end, and the Spirit all throughout. So I think that is my I think I talked really fast. That's my very quick but deliberate and focused plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Reverend Lee. That was very inspiring and close and near and dear to my heart as well, with intentional faith development as an important key. And I think it was very inspiring to all of us how it came from your study of 5 practices. It's a very helpful situation you have there. Our next panelist is Lee Schreiber from Mount Vernon Place, UMC in the District of Columbia. He's going to share with us the exciting and innovative journey that Mount Vernon Place has taken to develop its own discipleship pathway and process and program. So let's hear what he has to say. Lee?
Thank you, Linda. As Linda just mentioned, our practice of developing a discipleship pathway was a little non-traditional to what the conference suggests, and so offered as another way to think about discipleship pathways. For us, I'm going to speak more specifically about what the development of that pathway looks like more specifically rather than programming. But as we move through this journey, I'll be talking about identifying the context, developing a process, and then discerning how to communicate the work that we've done with the congregation that we serve. And so for us here at Mount Vernon Place, we are a community that is deeply committed to the idea that we are meant to be a community that is one community, both in person and online. Prior to the pandemic, we were not an online church. We were not an online community. And we, through the course of the past 2.5 years, developed really intentional online spaces. And so when we returned to in-person worship, we have sought to seek to nurture both of those communities. Sometimes we use the language of different campuses, but thinking about all of the people that gather as one community. And so for us at Mount Vernon Place, at the start of 2022, one of the goals that we set for this year, our church leadership, was to develop a intentional discipleship pathway. I'm sure for those of you that are serving in churches, you can relate to the fact that there are informal pathways that exist in different areas. And so for us, it was very much a process of taking some of the disparate parts of discipleship and thinking through them and bringing them together into an intentional system of discipleship. And so for us, as we think about where we've been, we had some existing infrastructure that helped guide us as a community. One of those pieces was an informal but pretty systematized membership pathway. And so what it would look like for someone who is deepening their connection to our congregation would be first to accept an invitation to coffee with our pastor, the Reverend Dr. Donna Claycomb-Sokol. From there would be periodic invitations to gather at a Get Connected event to learn more about our congregation and sort of what different programs and ministries and opportunities to serve are available. And that would end with an intentional invitation to attend a 6-week small group that is based on a Disciples Path, which is it's a course that's based on a book by the Reverend Jim Harnish out of the Florida Conference. So that was sort of this informal membership pathway. At the end of Disciples Path, folks would have the opportunity to join the church or to take membership vows. And so part of that existing infrastructure is that we really take seriously our United Methodist vows in our baptismal covenant to be present to the church with our presence, our service, our witness, our gifts, and our witness. And so those pieces are a part of every baptismal or membership practice in worship, to where both those joining the church or being baptized make that commitment, and those who are part of the congregation reaffirm that commitment. And so that is some of our pre-existing infrastructure that laid the groundwork for our pathway. And so as we move into developing the process, we were really drawn to the idea of having something really snappy and creative and brilliant to sort of roll out to the congregation. And so we were trying to think through what are the really creative ideas and branding pieces that we could come up with that would make this accessible. And honestly, that practice distracted us a little bit until we eventually came back to really discerning these questions of what are we already doing or offering when it comes to discipleship and moving people to deeper connection with our church? What do we feel called to? Who do we feel called to? And then what is missing? And so at the start of that question, we imagine people that are showing up to our community asking questions like, where do I start to engage with this community? And how do I grow in this community? And so that led us to this space of thinking about belonging and connection. And in that, the first two steps of our eventual pathway are really oriented around a guest experience and programming focused. And so for this first question, where do I start? Thinking through what does it look like for someone to arrive at our church for the very first time, and what is in place to help that person know how to start a connection or a relationship with our community. And then the second question, how do I grow? Folks that have been in worship or experienced an outreach event have decided to start showing up regularly in our space and deciding that perhaps we want to continue to grow in this place. And so really thinking through what programs and ministries are in place to help people grow in their discipleship and deepen their connection to our congregation. So from there, we flip to the second two parts of our pathway, which are really oriented around questions of how do I go deeper and how do I love God with all of my heart? And so this is thinking through integration and more membership and a sort of formal connection to this congregation, and is really focused on leadership development and being member focused. And so what does it look like to not just participate and receive programs and ministries in the congregation, but to also contribute to and to offer our gifts, presence, service, and witness, and prayers back to the church. And then continuing to go deeper into that. And what does it look like to be deeply committed and to really not just claim this place as my church, but to claim our church as family, and to think through our connection to church and how is this something that we have decided that we are going to prioritize our connection to a faith community in our life over other areas. And so we went through this process where our staff team, myself, along with our pastor, thought through some initial framing and answering some of those initial questions of what are we already doing or offering, who and what do we feel called to, and what is missing. We then took that sort of initial list of programs and ministries, we sorted them into sort of these 4 different categories where we thought they fit, along with leadership opportunities, to one of our leadership teams. And it was a really collaborative process where they were invited to really help with that question of what is missing and to help us move different parts around. And then from there, it went to our core leadership team. Mount Vernon Place operates on the simplified board model. So we have our board that is responsible for ad council or church council, staff, parish, finance, trustees, all of that is one group of people. And so then that, our sort of framed and collaborated pathway went to that group of people who then were able to offer in the additional formal adopting of that pathway. And so we went through this process. We developed an external document and an internal document. Our internal document, I'll talk a little bit more about, but it really came down to how do we now communicate this pathway that we've thought through and developed with the congregation. And so we paired the development of this pathway and its theming with a discipleship worship series that our pastor designed, that was based on her experience at Orange Theory Fitness, which is a novel workout experience. And so all of the language that frames our pathway for this external document that someone might pick up in the community and see, what does it look like to move through a discipleship pathway at Mount Vernon Place, is connected to that brand. And so if you'll go to the next slide, Bill, here is sort of our final product where we paired the parts of our discipleship pathway with this worship series. And so each sermon had the same title as the part of the pathway week after week. So the first week was about showing up and warming up. The second week was about base pace. The third week was about push pace. The last was about all out. And so those are our themes. But I think for me, what's really critical about this document is the questions. What are the questions that someone is asking as they seek to place themselves in this pathway? Where do I start? How do I grow? How do I go deeper? How do I love God with all of my heart? And that allows folks to identify where they are and what's available for folks that are asking those questions. And so there's pieces of sort of that informal membership pathway at different spots along this, but really designed to build on itself. And so someone who's asking, where do I start? Questions is thinking about attending worship or has experienced community somehow through an outreach event or attending worship or being a part of a small group space that their friend invited them to. Moving into the second piece, praying with others. We offer a morning prayer online every weekday morning, just for 15 minutes, and these different ways to serve like Jesus. There's the second parts of that membership pathway that we talked about, participating in that Get Connected event or taking the Disciples Path class, moving into how do I go deeper? What does it look like to be a leader in this place? And then all out, what does it look like to really intensify my engagement with this community? And so if you'll go to the next slide, Bill, this is a helpful context space. So for those that are unfamiliar with Orange Theory or this group workout trend, and what do these sort of technical terms of base pace or push pace mean? That is also on this document that someone could pick up in our congregation on a Sunday morning to sort of know what we're talking about. In the frame, we also have sort of the discrete ways of how do I go deeper and make a difference through service to our church community. So again, this sort of meets folks at that question of, or that transition point of from exclusively receiving from church to contributing to a church community. And then if you'll go to the next slide, Bill, just a few notes about sort of the unfolding impact of formalizing our pathway. And so the external impact is that we now have this document that someone can pick up and use as a guide for engagement and through deepening discipleship at Mount Vernon Place. And then internally, we also have developed what for us is an accountability measure and a programmatic outline. And so we've now advertised really publicly that these are the programs that are in each of those areas. And so as we're thinking through the programming on the discipleship pathway that ought to be in place, as we seek to continue to answer those questions, what are we already doing and offering? Who and what do we feel called to? And what is missing? Helps us design our discipleship. And then the other piece was sort of the development of these core questions that we want to be asking at each step of the pathway. And so for folks that are in that first step, the questions that our church leaders are thinking about is, how are we meeting people already searching for authentic community that are going to risk showing up to church without being sought after? How do we nurture curiosity and relationships that lead people to want to come and see our church? So not just expecting folks to be walking in our doors on a Sunday morning, but how are we proactively in the community? And to think through what is a great first encounter with our church looks like. In that second step, thinking through what do we do with people after they've asked, after they have risked or chosen to test out our church? How are we prepared to receive those people well and to help them get connected? How do we never miss an opportunity to invite someone into authentic relationship through Mount Vernon Place? And the third question, thinking through those sort of questions that I've already mentioned a little bit. How do we start to claim this place as my church and to navigate the transition from receiving church to contributing to church? being in ministry with a congregation. And then I think in that last question is inviting people to claim MVP, not just as church, but as family, something that I'm going to prioritize over other things in my life, but also asking folks in that step, how are you mentoring folks and nurturing folks along the journey in other parts of the pathway? And so that is sort of a brief summary of our process and some of the core questions that we came to. And I hope that it's helpful for you. We are in the earlier stages, so we're much closer to some of you as you develop your pathways and some of the folks that have gone before me and have been at this work for a long time. And so I'm grateful to be experimenting in discipleship with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Lee, what a great story. What a great journey. It was very exciting and inspiring, I'm sure, to all of us to hear how far you've come and all the work that's going into making your church a strong, intentional discipleship pathway church. Reverend T.J. Mound will now wrap up things for us. He serves as pastor of Lisbon UMC in Woodbine, Maryland. TJ has worked for a while now with developing programs and intentional discipleship pathways, and he's going to offer us some words to the wise as we move forward. TJ.
Linda, thank you for that introduction. My name is TJ Mound, and I am a local licensed pastor. I've been serving as a local licensed pastor for 7 years. And I've served 2 different congregations, Araby United Methodist Church, which I served for 6 years, and Lisbon United Methodist Church, which I just recently finished my first full-year appointment there. Both of these churches are in rural areas. Araby, whenever I arrived, was a congregation of about 20 that was in conflict. A portion of the church had left the church, and so there was some work to do, especially in that first year of listening and rebuilding relationships and healing within the congregation. It took me about 3 years before I really understood the importance of an intentional discipleship pathway. And so in the 3rd year, I started to introduce it to the congregation, and I introduced it to our leadership team and had 0 interest, no engagement at all. And so I kind of went back to the drawing board, and what I realized was that I had to come up with a way that resonated with them. And so in the 4th year, I came back and I reintroduced it using some new terminology, some new visuals. And this time I had 1 person that got engaged, 1 individual in the church. And me and this individual started to meet on a regular basis and started to just go through the intentional process together. Over time, this person became excited. He shared with the congregation his experience. And then all of a sudden, there were 4 people engaged in the process. Those 4 people over time were then moved into leadership positions in the church. And in the 6th year, we began discussions, and this was actually during the pandemic. We reached out to nonprofit organizations because the leadership team wanted to become focused externally instead of internally. And so we invited nonprofit organizations to come in and to meet with us and to present what they were doing, the needs they were meeting, but also the gaps that they were seeing in our community that no one else was meeting currently, so that we could begin to hear. Also, that 1 person who initially engaged with me, the first person who engaged with me in discipleship, became a pastor himself. And unfortunately, in the 6th year, in the middle of this process, I got reappointed, and the other gentleman got reappointed to a church, and he's now serving 3 churches in the Shenandoah Junction area of the Baltimore-Washington Conference. That brought me to Lisbon. And Lisbon, I saw this as a blessing and an opportunity to take everything that I had learned at Araby and to be able to introduce it kind of in a new way and at the beginning, and be able to move forward. So at Lisbon, during my transition meeting, I intentionally set very clear expectations with our leadership team. Within the first year, I introduced the Intentional Discipleship Framework or Pathway. I started a Bible study group called the Grow Group, and we had 6 people involved. I invited 2 people into one-on-one intentional discipleship and have 1 person that is continuing in this process. And in our second year, we started a second Grow Group with 5 people involved. So currently in Lisbon, we have 13 people involved in individual discipleship intentionally, out of 48 average attendance on worship. So a little over 12 or 13% of people are involved. And so I just want to share with you that even in a small congregation, that it is possible to build and to have an intentional discipleship pathway that engages people. And I encourage you, don't get frustrated if you only have 1 or 2 or 3 people who initially engage, to continue on with that process. At Lisbon, we also have 1 certified lay servant, and we also have 1 person that is in the process of becoming a certified lay servant. And so that is some of the positive things that has happened at Lisbon. And so what I want to share with you this evening is some things that I've learned and some things that I wish I had known at the beginning of this process. And so there are 10 practices that I want to share with you for leaders or spiritual leaders in intentional discipleship pathway. Bill, will you go forward 2 slides, please? The first one is simple but hard. Listen more than you talk. When I first got to Araby, I was telling them what we ought to be doing and telling them. And what I've learned is to listen. And because listening allows you to learn where are they spiritually. And so I'm always listening to groups, individuals, experiences, and I'm always listening with this question in mind. What does this situation tell me about where this person or group is spiritually? And then I ask myself, what is the next step that God might be encouraging them to take? And I engage them and invite them to take that next step. Number 2, if we go forward, Bill, always ask what they mean. What do I mean by that? Well, language matters, and many of us pastors and spiritual leaders have been trained to use theological language, and we think we know what everyone means whenever they use theological language. But for example, at Araby with our leadership team, I took a 3x5 card and I passed it out to each member of the leadership team. And I said, in 2 sentences or less, write down your understanding of discipleship. And I got everything from a person that reads the Bible to a person that has devoted themselves to the Lordship of Jesus Christ to, I don't know, right? Well, that's information that I gathered. And then it was like, okay, we have to define some terms as a community so that the language we're using, everyone is on the same page with what we mean by disciple or sacraments or etc. So always ask and don't assume that you know what people mean when they use common theological language. If you'll go to number 3. One of the important turning points was inviting the leadership team to shift their mindset from technical to adaptive leadership. What I mean by that is, if you wake up in the morning and you have a toothache, your tooth is hurting, you know what to do. You know to call the dentist, tell them your tooth is hurting. They're going to tell you to come in. They're going to look at it. They're going to say, we can fix this for X amount of dollars. They do it and you leave the dentist and hopefully you're feeling better. That's technical leadership. Adaptive leadership is looking at it and saying, well, my church is changing. My community around my church is changing. The institutional church is changing. The world is changing. And so all of this change is occurring. And so it requires you to take an experimental approach to leadership. So what I did was invite our congregation and our leadership team to say, hey, we're going to experiment with different things. And what's important is that we learn from them, that we learn something from them. And so the real key here is to give yourself and your team permission to fail as long as you walk away learning, right? If you learn something. You'll go to number 4. Shift from programs to pathways. And the big thing here is to understand the shift is understanding how everything you're doing is connected to each other, right? So how is your church structure, organizational structure, connected to your ministries? How is your ministries connected to your discipleship pathway? And then to identify in those connections, what are the important metrics between each of those connections so that you can measure them and adapt and change as needed as that adaptive leadership is required. And then to take and align everything that you're doing into that framework or pathway. And then if you have things that are left over, see if you can change them. And if they don't fit, get rid of them. Get rid of them. Please go to number 5. It's important as leaders, both spiritual and pastoral, to know and communicate your expectations. One of the things that I got really frustrated with was people weren't getting engaged in discipleship. And after I had some conversations with them, I began to realize that I had an assumption, I had an expectation that they were all wanting to fulfill their baptismal vows. And I realized quickly that that wasn't necessarily true. Some people just wanted to be comfortable, right? Some people wanted to serve. Some people were there because their family had grown up in that church and it was the right thing to do, right? Right. So at my appointment at Lisbon, one of the very first things I shared with him for my expectations was this. I have an expectation that we all take our baptismal vows seriously and we desire to be in relationship with Jesus Christ. And I'm going to communicate and act accordingly based off of that expectation, right? So that communication let them know, hey, this is going to be the direction that he's going to be leading us in as we're moving forward together. Understand, if you go to number 6, please. Understand the power of questions. We've heard tonight from Reverend Lee and others how important the questions we ask are to our intentional discipleship pathway. So for me, for example, I started the process asking this: what do I need to do to make disciples of Jesus Christ? For me, a shift occurred whenever I began to ask the question, what is God's design for making disciples of Jesus Christ? And how do I invite people into that, right? So the first question I was asking was focused on, well, how do I do something? The second question helped me to understand that God's already doing something and is inviting us to participate in what God is already doing. So understand the power of questions, especially as leaders. You'll go to number 7. Meet people where they are, but don't leave them there, right? So at both churches, Araby and Lisbon, whenever I began to engage people, they said, we want a Bible study. Okay, I did a Bible study. But every time I had an opportunity in that Bible study, if it was a particular verse, if a question came up from a member of the group, anything that I could do to connect that to the larger discipleship pathway, I did it every opportunity I could. At the end of every Bible study, invite them into the process, right? So connect what you're doing when you're meeting people where they are, connect it to the discipleship pathway, and then intentionally invite them into the pathway so that they can learn and grow. Also, be flexible with where the Spirit is leading. At Lisbon, they first said, we want to do a Bible study. We did that for 6 months. And then they came to me and said, well, we feel like we're still on the breast. We're on the spiritual milk. How do we get on the meat? And I said, well, let's have a conversation about it. And what we ended up with is an adult confirmation class, right? Let's go through an adult confirmation class. Let's revisit as First Peter says, the ordinances of God, right? The basics. And then, but again, I'm already thinking, okay, we're doing 42-week adult confirmation class. What am I going to be inviting them into as that comes to a close? How am I going to be connecting that and inviting them into deeper discipleship? If you'll go to number 8, please. Don't invite people to only do discipleship. Invite them to be disciples. Sometimes we can get so focused on what it looks like to be doing things that we forget that the doing has to come out of something. And that out of something is an internal shift in the heart that is brought on by the fruits of the Spirit and transformed by the Spirit. So always keep in mind that while we have to have metrics and ways of measuring where people are and how they're moving through the process, that it's also about who they're becoming, who is Christ inviting them to be in the world. So always don't simply invite them to do discipleship, but to be disciples. And number 9, make sure the congregation owns the pathway and not simply the pastor or the leadership team. This is a lesson that I learned at Araby, right? I was very focused on the pathway that I saw and that I developed. I introduced it to the leadership team, and then boom, I was reappointed. And not only was I reappointed, the church council chair was appointed to another church as well. And then his wife left with him. And so all of a sudden, because the congregation hadn't fully developed ownership of the process, they were left with a vacuum whenever we were reappointed. And so as you're developing your intentional discipleship process, think about ways that you can help your congregation own it so that it becomes a part of who they are and a part of their DNA, and that it doesn't leave with you when you're reappointed. Go to number 10, please. And a part of your discipleship pathway has to be connected to your community outside of your church, whether or not that's a ministry. So for example, at Araby, I mentioned that we were starting to meet with nonprofits and identifying needs that weren't being met. At Lisbon, we partnered with Howard County, the Howard County Local Child Board, the Howard County Public Library, Lisbon Elementary School, The Grill, which is a restaurant in Lisbon, and we brought all of them together to provide meals during the summer for children who are food insecure when they're out of school, right? But we're intentional there. How do we share the love of Christ with them in a way that invites them, and hopefully they see the love of Christ through us and become a part of our process? Another way is to think about new faith expressions, right? So how might we be out in our community doing new things and inviting people to participate out in the community in those new things as well? But it's important that you look at how are you being connected outside of the church as a part of your pathway. Because as people grow, I think it was Lee that mentioned, as people's hearts are changed, right? They want to go out. They're motivated to share the love of Christ with someone. Where are you inviting them to go out and to do that? And how are you supporting them? So these are 10 practices or things that I wish that I had known. And I hope that they're helpful to you. And I look forward to answering any questions that you might have. Thank you.
So it's one of those nights. I think I'm unmuted. My video airs. I think my video is starting. Computer decided to be slow tonight. That's what I get when you update some of the software on computers. Or I'm frozen. So let's, yeah, definitely frozen.
No, you're
There we
moving.
go. There, I'm back. Updated my computer and it slows down. Thank you, TJ. We did have one question that came into the Q&A, and I'll just let you repeat it. What was number 6 in your leadership tip? They stepped away, and that'll teach you. Don't step away. You're going to miss some great content. You just got to stay glued to the screen till we're done, but that happens. So what's number 6?
So number 6 is to understand the power of questions. And we heard from Reverend Lee and others the importance of the questions you ask as you're developing your internal discipleship pathway. So just realize the importance of the questions and I gave an example for me personally. Whenever I first began looking at discipleship, I was asking the question, how do I make disciples of Jesus Christ? And something shifted whenever I began to ask the question, what is God's design for making disciples of Jesus Christ? So for me personally, just that shift in that question opened up new possibilities and changed my perspective of how to engage around discipleship.
Excellent. Thank you so much, TJ. Just wanted to check, not a lot of questions came in. So for our participants tonight, if you have questions, we've got a few minutes. We can answer some of them. As you're thinking about questions that you may want to ask, I want to give some highlights. Jack's going to do some wrap up in a minute, but I'm going to give some highlights of our next Training Tuesday is next Tuesday, the 15th of November. If you have not signed up, you want to sign up. We're going to look at the vitality pillar of live and love like Jesus. And what living and loving like Jesus really is going to teach us to move from our seats to the streets, how we empower people to move away from the pews and out into the parking lot, out in the streets, out into the community to share the love of God through Jesus Christ. And I am so excited that we're bringing in Reverend Dr. Elaine Heath to present our topic next week. Elaine has been a professor at Perkins School of Theology, a dean at Duke Divinity School, and one would think she's a prolific author and lecturer and retreat leader, and one would think that she is merely an academic, and she is not. She is an academic practitioner, meaning she teaches about starting missional communities. So what did she do? She started a missional community in retirement, and she has a missional community on a farm outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, that does community farming, immigration advocacy. They take in immigrants, they have worship, they just do it all in the context of an intentional missional community. And it is worth the price of admission because, you know, these are free. It is worth the price of admission to attend Training Tuesday. So you can go to the Baltimore-Washington Conference website. You can go to the Peninsula Delaware Conference website. You can register for next Tuesday's Training Tuesdays. Please tell your friends. It is, I have read her books. I spent some time talking with her last week. It is amazing what they're doing to intentionally not just follow Jesus, but to take what they're learning as they follow Jesus and live it out and love all people. And so it's just going to be a wonderful evening. So Jack, what can you tell us as we wrap up tonight?
First of all, I want to thank our panelists and for their willingness to share how God is leading them and God is using them to do the real work of developing disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And I want to thank our Leadership Development Board because this wouldn't happen without the work that they are doing. I just wanted to kind of share three things that I think are important to understand about what we've heard tonight. First of all, this work takes time. If you look at what St. Matthew's New Life and what Severna Park has done, you go, oh my gosh, we could never do that. We're talking about 5 to 10 years of work here. Okay, so you start where you can start, and you start following God's leading and do the work and see what God does. So be patient and understand it's a process. Second of all, think in terms of practices and activities, not just programs. Minister Lee talked about coffee with the pastor. We heard about block party. These are things that you don't have to develop large programs, but think in terms of how you can connect people to Jesus, whether they're just starting out or whether they're moving along that path. The other thing is when you can actually visually represent to people what they can expect or what to be looking for, it really helps. So you saw a couple of different graphics of what that pathway looks like, very similar to the rubric we presented 2 weeks ago. The terminology might be different, but as long as people are understanding that, oh, I'm exploring, this is where I need to go, or I really want to grow deeper, this is where I need to go. So that's, I think, really important. And then finally, I keep hearing people saying, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough people. And don't let the bishop hear you say this, don't use the word volunteer, okay? We're not volunteers, we are disciples, we are servants of Jesus Christ. And if you are wanting more people to lead in your church, the answer is pretty simple. It may not be easy, but it's simple. Develop disciples, develop growing disciples. I think Reverend Lee said, when people start growing spiritually, they have to do something. And so that is what we're talking about here, is if you are looking to grow your ministry, if you're looking to develop leaders, then start with the basics, which is helping people to grow in their relationship to Jesus through spiritual formation, through service, through outreach, and through connecting with others, both in the church and in the community. So all of that to say, I teased a couple weeks ago that we have a couple things that the Leadership Development Board are working on. The first of which is what we are calling an Intentional Discipleship Pathway Teaching Church Program. That's a lot of words, but what we are doing is we're working to identify, it's probably only going to be 1 or 2 or 3 churches that are willing to serve as teaching churches, and then we're going to pair them with a church that wants to develop a pathway. And so you'll see more information in mid-December or so about what that process looks like. Like I said, there may not be many opportunities because this is a pilot program. One of the things that we know as a leadership development board is that you have to experiment, you have to try things. And I think each of the panelists here will tell you that they've experimented, they've tried things. There are things that have worked, there are things that have not worked, and you double down on the things that do work and you let go of the things that don't. So that's one thing to be looking forward to through the eConnection or the Peninsula Delaware Conference e-news. The second thing is what we are calling an IDP mastermind, and Reverend Mount, TJ Mount, has volunteered to lead a mastermind for free. This is a 12-month program where he's going to teach the framework that he's developed. We're going to work with a handful of churches. You're going to meet monthly. You're going to learn through videos his framework, but then work as a cohort to actually test out where God is leading you in your congregation to develop an intentional discipleship pathway. And so again, we're trying things out and we're going to see how this works, but we're excited about this because what we know is that God is working, and God is working through the people you've seen here tonight, and we want to share that with you. So I don't know, Bill, if there are any other questions, but that's kind of a wrap from our end.
Those are all the questions. I would add, in addition to those, if you're not familiar with our Vitality Pathways as annual conferences, you can go to both conference websites and fill out an intent to apply form. They take, we have till November 15th, and our 3 Vitality Pathways, the Launch Pathway, the Catalyst Initiative, and the Readiness Initiative, all will touch also on this topic in some way as it looks holistically. What I appreciate about what Jack and Leadership Development Board is they're focusing laser-like on that discipleship piece, and our intentional vitality pathways are looking at the whole system and how that all incorporates, because we do know with annual conferences, not everything fits for every situation, but we want to let everyone know who's participating tonight is we're providing a lot of opportunities for your congregation to connect, engage, and get equipped at no charge to your congregation. And so these are resources that are timely and invaluable, and we want to make sure you take advantage of whatever's being offered, because it's your mission shares that are providing these training opportunities so that you can be equipped to reach people and transform lives in Jesus' name. So thank you for taking the time to participate. For our panelists, thank you so much. For those who are doing the work, we appreciate you. We see you. Your ministry is just helping so many people And for our Leadership Development Board, thank you for the hard work that you've been doing behind the scenes for several years now to get us to this point of what people are seeing. So thank you all for your faithfulness as we continue to work to develop leaders who will help transform lives. For those participating tonight, thank you. God bless you. Have a great rest of your evening, and we will see you next Tuesday as we learn about living and loving like Jesus. Good night.